Faculty Research Spotlight. This has been a new tradition for our college where we showcase our second-year faculty, their research, their creative activities, and we also have another research spotlight for our faculty who got tenure and promoted, which we will have in the spring semester. So I hope you will come join us as well to celebrate our faculties, their big milestone and their research accomplishment and their creative activity as well. In today's panel presentation, we feature two new faculty in their second year, Dr. Gregory Gondwe and Professor Taylor Moon Castagnari. And this is their second year, and they will showcase their research. And Professor Gondwe's research will be about outsmarting digital technology in Africa, and Professor Taylor Moon's talk will be on visual metaphor, ways of seeing. And it is my great honor. I'm working with my fantastic team in my dean's office. So thank you. A big shout out to Emily McKellar for helping us organizing today's research spotlight and sending out the publicity for our panel presentation. And also we also have our associate dean, Dr. Prof. facilitating today's discussion. We're supposed to have another third speaker, Professor Rob Ray, but unfortunately he had a flu, so he was not able to present today. So hopefully in the future we'll showcase his research and creative activity as well. And because Professor Moon had to teach at 1 o'clock, so we'll have her go first, and then Professor Gondwe will go second. And so now, without further ado, again, I want to thank all the audience for attending our today's research spotlight featuring second-year faculty. I know all of us are very hectic schedule and you're busy, so I'm really appreciative of you taking the time to hear our second-year faculties, their research and creativity. And so now I would like to introduce Dr. Prof. our Associate Dean, who will serve as our facilitator for today's panel presentation.
Thank you, Dean Chuang. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you all for being here. I'm Paris Dufayes, and I'm the Associate Dean of the college. Just a quick note about how our forum works today. So each presenter will have about 20 to 22 minutes, and you can ask your questions at the end of each presentation. However, I would like to encourage you to type your questions as they occur to you in the chat section. I know from experience that sometimes when I don't articulate my questions, I tend to forget them. So please feel free to type your questions in the chat as you know they occur to you. So our first speaker is Professor Taylor Moon Castagnari. Is that right, Taylor? Yes. And Professor Moon is a contemporary artist and an assistant professor of art and design at Cal State San Bernardino. She received her MFA in art from the University of Oxford's Ruskin School of Art. Previously, Taylor was an assistant professor of graphic design at Missouri Southern State University, and while she was there, she was invited to teach internationally in Sweden and was selected as an artist speaker for the Caribbean Developers Conferences in Punta Cana, Dominican Republic. Professor Moon's exhibition, The Drive-Through Nation, which is really cool, is on display at the Robert Francis Fullerton Museum of Art right now through December 3rd, 2022. If you haven't seen it, I really want to encourage you to do so. She will be giving an artist talk at the museum on Thursday. That is just 2 days from today, November 17th from 5 to 6. And then, Emily, would you be able to provide that link? So we'll have that link in the chat in case you'd like to RSVP to the talk and to attend it. Professor Moon's talk today is entitled Visual Metaphor, Ways of Seeing. Please.
Excellent. Am I good to share my screen?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, thank you so much for having me here. As it was noted earlier in the presentation, while my slide presentation says Taylor Moon, I've also added another name to my name, which is Castagnari, after being married this summer. So as Paris so wonderfully put, I did receive my master's from the University of Oxford and my undergrad from UC Santa Barbara. Received several certifications towards UX and UI and coding, and previously worked at Missouri Southern State University. While I was debating which part of my practice to speak about today, whether it be my graphic design professional practice, working directly with clients, or talking about my exhibition practice, I felt that given the current exhibition for the Drive-Thru Nation and the artist talk that Paris had mentioned is coming up on Thursday, I felt that it would be appropriate to talk about how this work fits into my larger practice and how it represents visual metaphor and the ways in which I perceive the world. So I definitely would encourage you to see that. I'm also currently teaching motion graphics this semester, and because most of what I'm about to show you today pertains to animation and motion graphics, I thought it would be a perfect segue. Because my work also is interdisciplinary and draws from many different modes of working and thinking, I also am introducing a junior topics experimental animation course next semester, which really coincides with, again, what I'm going to show you today, because a lot of my work takes a more experimental approach to animation, often like either taking a more documentary approach or a more stylistically poetic approach, using a lot of metaphor and symbolism, rather than what you typically expect of animation when you think like Pixar or other animated films you might have seen. So today's talk is based on the book title by John Berger, Ways of Seeing. And so I'll be pulling some quotes from him to relay it back in context of the scope of my work. So he said, "We never look at just one thing. We are always looking at the other, at the relation between things and ourselves." And I thought I wanted to take this one step further. And so what I think is, we're not only looking at things in relation to ourselves, but things in relation to one another. And so we're doing this constant comparative visualization of the world around us. And so one thing that I noticed, and this is a quote directly from my article in Shout Out SoCal, which is a magazine in which I was featured in the spring. I'd said, if you are exposed to two things enough simultaneously, you'll begin to form associations with them, no matter how dissimilar they are. And I found that the more dissimilar they are, the more interesting it actually becomes to compare them. I found that comparing dissimilar things often broadens the viewer's perspective on a particular subject, because it almost derails their way of thinking by being introduced to a topic that's so out of left field. So my work asks questions such as, what is the commonality between flags and drive-thrus as seen in the Drive-Thru Nation? How does satellite technology pertain to colonizing histories? Each of these works I'll be going through and explaining them a little bit further, so I won't be leaving these lofty questions in the air. What similarities do museums and circuses have? What can we learn from the nomadic lifestyles of astronauts in the unhoused community? And this question right here, I'm going to be going into first with my projects. Finally, one other question I'll be asking and assessing with my work is, how can cheerleading be used as a metaphor for neurobiology and psychology? So again, I really strive for that interdisciplinary approach. I was featured in Freeze magazine for my work on the nomadic lifestyles of astronauts in the unhoused community, and that comparison, because both are archetypes that have similarities in the way that they cope and survive in the world, ways in which they have uncanny sleeping positions, the gloves that they wear, the makeshift housing structures that they'll have. And I saw like repeated similarities over time. And so this work was featured in Frieze magazine. Samson Kimbalu, who is currently an acclaimed artist who is on the 4th plinth in Trafalgar Square in London, selected me as his artist pick and an artist to watch, and specifically goes in depth about this work. And I've included the links here, which I can forward the slides later to everyone on this Zoom meeting. This work was also featured on Orbit Art Gallery in their Stage 1 exhibition, which goes into the topics of artists who explore space. So one thing that I was particularly interested in, as I told you, is when you are exposed to two things at the same time, as I said, you begin to associate them together. So during my undergraduate studies, I was taking an art and aerospace course at the same time that I was biking to class every day. And I would often pass the homeless individual who lived behind my apartment, and we would carry on conversations about his daily routine, how he met his basic needs, how he defined space around him. And I began to see these metaphors about what I was learning in class with my relationship with him. And so I found that both wore like oversized baggy clothing that was more meant to endure the elements. Both were figures who either were removed societally or removed physically, albeit space, and looking at society from that external position. So I was also curious about like how both had this aspect of carrying everything that they need on their back in the nomadic lifestyle way. So one carries a primary life support and the other carries a backpack. Both sleep in uncomfortable and cramped sleeping environments. And what I was most curious about is the relation both of them had with society. One given honor and then one more isolated. I created animations to hyperbolize some of these transformations between parallels I saw visually, not just conceptually. So the gridded structures of shopping carts, and then the supports for rocket launches, the gloves on an astronaut's gloves versus the gloves on an unhoused individual, how one lies among trash around us, whereas the other leaves trash in outer space, things of that nature. So I'll just flip through a couple other images related to this project. So to go center back on ways of seeing, I utilize a lot of neutral colors, if you've observed in my past slides, to outline my ways of seeing. So I'll use pretty much monochromatic colors throughout all of my animations, and then use pop of colors when intending to make more of a statement. That's also seen in my Drive-Through Nation exhibition, where all of the signs are all in vibrant colors, but then the backgrounds will all be very muted brown tones. My animations serve as more quick vignettes that indicate motion rather than complete start to finish narratives. Because I know I only have 20 minutes, I'm not going to go through the full animation here. So the other half of my work, as I mentioned before, has a more documentary intent, because I believe there are two lenses in ways of seeing. One lens being metaphor and the other lens being empathy. So a lot of my animations, like in the story of the Nomad, derive on first-person encounters that are often like brief, but sometimes recurring, in which I hear people's stories and either adapt them into a metaphor or take them down photojournalistically directly as I see it. So in this example, a woman who was at the hospital with me was a cancer patient and asked me to walk with her as she went to her appointment. And she disclosed her story. And at that time, I created an animation portraying her strength, but also her frustrations with the healthcare system to properly care for her. And at the same time, having a near-death experience at that time myself, which I won't delve into details at that point in terms of the hospitalization, but was feeling similar frustrations. So this turned into a journal article with the American Medical Association's Journal of Ethics, wherein I highlighted her story, and they shared both the animation and stills of this patient. So this isn't an isolated event to that one particular story, but carries on to other stories that I encounter on a day-to-day basis. I usually include the speaker animated in the foreground, whereas the background usually remains more static, and text of what they're saying will occur in the back. Sometimes as they're speaking, whatever they say will be animated in the back as well. For example, if they said, and at that point, I drove to the hospital, you would then see in the background animated the car driving to the hospital. So trying to help individuals, as I said, step into another's shoes or inhabit a different mode of seeing, whether it be the lens of someone else or the lens of a metaphor. So in Berger's ways of seeing, he says, we only see what we look at, but to look is an active choice. So when considering these narratives of individuals or even when seeing commonalities and patterns in everyday life, seeing the metaphor is a choice, or seeing the narratives of marginalized voices. So as I had mentioned earlier, I had done some work that basically explored the relationship between like satellite technology and like cartography. And so at the time I was taking a class on where we essentially like hacked Google Maps and added in our own illustrations to give a like first person experience or alternative experience to a static map, because satellite technology is really the idea of knowledge. And so in my art history classes, I learned that monarchs back in the day would receive maps of foreign locations, and to have one of these maps was the idea that you like owned or possessed that place to an extent. And so having this unbounded knowledge of places that we've never been to, I think is a little bit culturally disjoint. And so I wanted to create work that steps away from the idea of this like all-knowing mentality, and really interjects the first-person experience again into maps. So this was published on Next Museum, which is a virtual museum sponsored by the German government. So it's specifically with their Cultural Digital Foundation, sponsored through Museum Ulm, and with NRW Forum, which works with their cultural sector. And so this map, you can directly click on any of the given map markers, and it'll show, based on the coordinates that I embedded into the map, it'll show first-person illustrations I did of that map. So the significance of the locations of the map markers were they were everywhere that I got lost on that island. And so the idea of getting lost is very counterintuitive to the idea of using maps and using satellite imagery to tell you where you are at all times. A lot of Western culture mystifies the idea of losing yourself only if you're going to find yourself quickly thereafter. But this mentality in this project was giving up oneself entirely to the process of getting lost and experiencing the environment and letting the environment reveal itself to you. So these are the illustrations that were embedded into the map. The actual map illustration right here was embedded itself. Otherwise, it would look a little bit more like the prefabricated images provided by the satellite. And the active link for experiencing that for yourself, maybe in your free time, is also right here. I'm just going to check how I'm doing on time really quickly. So I'll go into a couple other projects. I may not get the chance to go in depth for every single one of them, but I'm very excited about this particular project. One, because it was part of my MFA thesis exhibition, and two, it is also going to be displayed at the Sassy Museum of Art in Pomona as of February. So I'll be sending out artist talk and opening reception information for that as well. But I was interested as a cheerleader formerly of 9 years about the ways in which balance and flexibility is not only an aspect of the sport, but also an aspect of the brain and how it operates on a day-to-day. It involves a lot of counterbalance between chemicals. When one part of the brain is compromised in terms of injury, the other portions will step in and basically pick up the weight for that part of the brain. And that's very poetic and metaphoric to the way in which cheerleading stunts, when you have girls lifting one another into the air, these athletes must counterbalance them to provide a stable platform for the girl in the air, otherwise known as the flyer. I also saw a lot of visual parallels across this project, seen in the way that cheerleading pom-poms looked like nerve fiber tracking, the way that I believe they're called EKG helmets looked like football helmets. So there's a lot of sense of play to this work. I was also interested in how cheerleaders relaying messages through chants and through encouragement also are like basically visually echo the way messages transfer across synapses in the brain. And dopamine, which is one of the receptors that travel across the synapse, coincides with like energy, which I feel also coincided with like the peppiness of the sport. So I was also curious about what happens when things fall into disarray, when stunts fall, when your emotional health isn't what it ought to be. And so this project explores a lot of those topics. Recently, I've also been looking at the shared similarities between museums and circuses. From my art history double major in undergrad, I learned that both actually have shared origins and histories. So they stem from the Kunstkammer, which was collections of wonder, in which wealthy aristocrats, basically from, I believe it was the 1700s, would collect items such as like nautilus shells, or what they believed to be unicorn horns, which turns out were like narwhal horns. And they would collect paintings and other oddities and rarities and put them into these literal cabinets that they would build. And they would have viewing parties for these Kunstkammers, or cabinets of wonder, that are very reminiscent of the modern day museum. as some of these oddities and rarities became more extreme, this gave way to P.T. Barnum's shows of human curiosities and other rarities, some of these being hoaxes and some of these kind of taking advantage more of or singling out humans of or othering humans in these performances. So I was curious how, since they both have same origins, what metaphoric relationship can be seen between museums and circuses today, both putting on a show, both having a ringmaster or curator of sorts, and even a lot of the sculptures of antiquity, I noticed, even have a very gestural poses or athletic poses similar to circus acrobatics. So that's something that I'm currently exploring and will be exhibiting in the future. And I'm not going to give away too much about the drive-through nation today, because if you want to hear a little bit more about that, I'm going to be sharing it on my talk on Thursday. I did get the notice that I'm right about at time, and I want to be respectful of Dr. Gondwe's amazing research. So thank you so much for listening, and it was a pleasure to share.
Thank you so much, Professor Moon. That was extremely interesting. Those associations that you make are just fascinating. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Professor Moon at this point? If you'd like, you can type your question in the chat as well.
I see Mr.
I'm sorry. Okay, yes, Jonathan, please.
That was very fun and informative. Thank you. I just had a very quick question about the use of, and I don't have the vocabulary, so you have to excuse me, what seemed like the accent colors in some of the images that you've shown. I'm just curious about what your method was with when to include those accents. So I'm thinking very specifically of, for example, you just mentioned talking about the black and white neutral colors. But then I noticed, like in the astronaut, it was the red band around the legs, and with the woman you were with in the hospital, the pink cap. So I was just curious about the process for those accents.
Definitely. That's a great question, and very in tune, or very detailed as well. The pink cap for the cancer patient related to breast cancer, using the color pink to reference that. For the astronaut red band, it was kind of giving a subtle nod to like NASA and whatnot, for like the use of like red, white, and blue and patriotism. And also just red is a very striking and richly saturated color. For the gold that I used in that, let me go ahead and share my screen one more time. The gold seen here of the trash bag, I was trying to highlight the metallic quality of the trash bag, but also lunar roving vehicles also have that like foil, golden foil like texture over them as well. And so I thought that was a cool visual parallel that also signifies the roving vehicle. For the drive-through nation, I use abundance of color just in all of the flags and signs, because I'm trying to show that it's a very kind of garish use of flags and signs, because it's sign pollution, because we're oversaturated with constant media and whatnot, but it's much subtler in some of the other works.
Thank you. Any other questions for Professor Moon? I have very quick question. So you mentioned the idea of drawing associations between two things, and you mentioned that the more dissimilar they are, the stronger that association can be, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was just thinking, I think that is just the function of a creative mind. And I was wondering how long it took for you, or how your training helped you see the world in such creative ways.
I would say in both undergrad and grad school, I attended more research-based institutions. They didn't really teach you so much how to animate or create digital content. Most of that was self-directed, but they taught you more how to think and how to explore broad ideas that you might have, and how to draw from other artists that maybe also work in metaphor or more conceptual work.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Again, this was fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Professor Greg Gondwe. Greg is an assistant professor of communication at Cal State San Bernardino. He received his PhD in media research and practice from the University of Colorado at Boulder in 2021. Professor Gondwe's current research agenda is characterized by three main themes: China and the media in Africa, digital literacy and misinformation in Africa, how timely, and social media platforms, governance, and youth resistance in Africa. Professor Gondwe is also a visiting scholar at Harvard's Institute for Social Media Rebooting for the 2022-23 academic year. And as a visiting scholar at Harvard, Greg is working on a book project that explores how youth in Africa use mundane technology against oppressive corporations and government structures. Wonderful. So Professor Gondwe's talk today is entitled Outsmarting Digital Technologies in Africa, Western Models, Local Realities. So take it away, Professor Gondwe.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all that have decided to take their time to attend. I hope you can hear me. My voice is not that perfect today. But anyway, I want to start by acknowledging the influence that Professor Lama has had on my topic. This is a working title, and once probably at some point it's going to change. So as mentioned, these are kind of like, this is my research agenda. The first one is digital media. I'm teaching classes in this aspect, mostly focusing on social media, ethics, and things of that kind. I'm also, I didn't think my voice would be this bad anyway, but I hope you can hear me. But anyway, I'm also right now working on with colleagues on looking on how we can actually optimize or utilize artificial intelligence within the framework of journalism. So we're kind of trying to create a model that can explain different phenomena within that kind of aspect. And then there's the China and the media in Africa. I did my dissertation on that. I thought it might die, but I think I've been privileged that so far there are 4 peer review articles that are emerging from these. I've been invited to join one of the think tank groups as a research associate. I've written some think tank pieces on this, and I'm part of one of the teams that is sponsored by the United States and China. I've also, through the same, done radio interviews, especially in Europe and Taiwan and Africa. So it looks like one of the continuous lucrative projects that I'll continue working on. And then the third one is misinformation, disinformation. I joined a team of scholars across the globe. We started, the 6 of us, we did research in 6 sub-Saharan African countries. And now it has expanded. It has gone beyond. And with that team, actually, we also organized a panel at the ICA in France this August, and the panel actually attracted more than 100 people And from that, we are also producing a special issue in one of our special journals. So it also looks at something that is continuing. And from the same misinformation and disinformation, this is where I actually draw most of my ideas for the project that I'm working on at Harvard. And it's also part of it that I'm actually going to work on. So my research focus is Sub-Saharan Africa, which is still very big. But for this project, I'm looking at Zambia, which is my country of origin. So just to give an idea, in 2020, in Zambia, the youth went out to the government and to the police to request for a permit to protest. The government refused, and actually there were threats that they would actually be punished for protesting. And their demands were simple. They said, no, we just want the government to look at us and actually create more opportunities for employment. And we also want the government to focus on the investors and see how they're treating people that they employ. This conversation started with the people that are with their experience, and they thought maybe the government could address this. But with their own reasons, I think the government did not want to do this. So what happened is the government refused to give them the permit, and the youth told the government that they would still go ahead to protest, and they even set the date and the place. So when that day came, the government deployed a lot of armed forces, looking around for anyone that was protesting. They spent the whole day there with these armed forces. Surprisingly, they never saw anyone actually protesting. And around 4 or 5 p.m., there was a video that was going viral, and the youth decided to actually go into the woods and just protest. And as you can see in their protest, they had 64 million viewers, 4 million likes, 1 million comments. So I've been doing actually research with these youth, and they said our objective was not to go and destroy anything. All we wanted was to actually deliver our message, and also reaching to 4 million viewers. I think that's our objective. Of course, these numbers are a little bit not very accurate. I'll also explain what I'm doing with it, because Zambia is has a population of 19.3 million at the moment, I think 19.3. So 64 million, that's does not really correlate with that. However, they are also, given the fact that this is the internet, we have other people outside Zambia that are participating in that. And then on the virtual political campaigns that you see there, we had this guy who is now the president of Zambia. And what his campaign strategy was, he would sit on social media and ask people, and respond to people's questions. So just say, ask whatever question. And many were the youth that would actually go and ask questions, type, and he would respond right away. Just to give a background, most of the African countries' road network was not good. So the government actually took advantage. They would first set the elections during the rain season when the roads were almost impassable. And it's only the government that they had the privilege to actually fly with a helicopter in these different places and campaign. So the opposition leaders did not have that opportunity to campaign to most people. But this guy used a strategy where he would sit and talk to the people around the country. And as we see here, he had 41 million viewers, 3.3 likes, and 1.4 million comments. So anyway, the idea of using social media or transforming whatever the West is creating into the local realities is not a new thing in Africa. What we've seen, I don't know if you've heard about mobile banking, is that most African cultures have transformed a mobile phone into a bank. So how it operates is you only need an old phone, a phone that you don't need data, you don't need the internet. It's just a number. And with your number, you can register and save your money in that phone. So most people actually migrated to mobile banking because of the less interest, and it's also very accessible. They don't need to go and line up to get money in a bank. They can get it anywhere within their community. They can send money through their phone. And what has happened in this sense is that the traditional banks have bowed down. They have decided to adopt this idea because they have realized that they are losing customers for to the mobile banking. And this is also where I draw my idea, in the sense that we see we can actually utilize, or we can use digital technologies that are created or built within the framework of elitism, hegemony, to actually deliver a message of social justice. I know might sound as if, I mean, it's not a new thing, because we've seen a lot of things happen. We've seen a lot of research done, and there's a dichotomy between those that support social media as the next frontier for emancipation in some ways for the marginalized, versus those that say, no, I think there's still great influence, or there's influence from corporations. The government can easily control this. And some of those, for example, would be, there's a recent book that was published about data colonialism, and Codry was argued that, it's just a transition from like what used to be capitalism, for example. This time you don't need to go and labor physically, you don't need to go and dig the mines, but instead you just need to sit in your grandmother's basement and play video games. And by so doing, you're creating data for somebody that is going to make more money than you can make. So I'm trying as much as possible not to belong to any of those groups. What I'm trying to see, for the most part, is this. Sorry, it came a little bit late. I'm trying to see how the youth in Zambia, or the so-called marginalized, organize online communities. Like, what strategies do they use to organize the communities? How do they outsmart the algorithms that are actually embedded within the elite structures, and how are they outsmarting government surveillance and government censorship? Just to go back to some of the theoretical underpinnings, is that I start with Karl Marx, whom we know, and his ideas, or his vision, that at one time the proletariats, who are the marginalized in this case, will overthrow the bourgeoisie. I think we waited for a long time. We never saw any of those. But I also get this idea of, from Kenneth Kaunda, who says, once you encourage a slave to think and act like a man, and in this sense, enlightenment, you are awakening a Gulliver pinned to the ground with threads by Lilliputians. If you've read this book, technically it's about this Gulliver, who is a giant among the midgets, but does not realize it. Somebody needs to actually awaken them. And the Gulliver believes in molarity. So the Gulliver is very nice to these people. And to some extent, they take advantage of this person and misuse that. But once that Gulliver is kind of like reawakened, there's a chance that, as he says, even in the acts of standing erect, he tears apart a system within which he is imprisoned. And I think to some extent, we're seeing those things happen. For example, we saw the Black Lives Matter and the influence it had. We've seen the influence that the so-called weak have had on people like Harvey Weinstein, Ara Kerry, and in other ways, we've seen power residing within the people that we've considered as weak in some ways, the changes that are existing. And I also borrow from one of the guy that does weak ties, strength of weak ties, who believes that weak ties allow distant clusters of people to access novel information that can lead to new opportunities, innovation, and increased productivity. So what are we seeing here? We have weak ties within social media. We have 41 million of people that do not know each other, yet they're actually causing influence. And this is also echoed by Mbembe, who thinks that, over time, or for a long time, we thought that agency and power are one and the same thing. He argues that no, these are two things, so the powerful can own, they have the power, they have the hegemony, but agency resides within us. And we are realizing that as people that are less privileged in some ways, the marginalized are realizing that they have agency to shape things. And going back to the example of, let's say, women and Harry, women and Harvey Einstein, the Black Lives Matter, and all those, we've seen agency in people that are considered as weak, and so further, he also argues, it's like, he compares this to the environment and how we've decided, or we've started caring about the environment. Whether we like it or not, we have realized that we have to be nice to the environment for the environment to be nice to us. If we focus on extraction and things of that kind, we'll be losing, we'll face more consequences of the wrath of the environment. And according to Mbembe, he believes that that's the same approach that is also happening within the ideas of technology, where it's not about the powerful, being nice to the weak, but it's about, and also it's not about the weak, just deciding to revolt, but it's about the realization that we have to coexist. We have to coexist. So we've seen now, Facebook, I think, is grappling, because, and they are also bowing down to us. They are trying to give us the best they can, giving us hope that this can also, there's hope in all this of what they're doing. Now we have Elon Musk, and all of us, I think most of us still think that maybe he's going to fail. Why? Because there's a less consideration of the weak within that approach. So we yet to see that. But anyway, most of this comes from the ideas of mundane technology. Nema is one of my colleagues who has written a book about technology of the oppressed. And excuse me. So it's where the local people are supposed to, are using technology that is created for the powerful, technology that is created with structures of algorithms, they're transforming that into artifacts that can actually help them work out or find ways to make their lives better. And of course, going back to the questions, this is where we're also seeing, and this is where I'm also interested in knowing how the youth did orchestrate online communities in Zambia amidst all the powerful corporations, amidst all the powerful government surveillance, amidst all the algorithms surrounding the whole thing. So ethnography is one of the theories, the methods I use, in the sense that I joined the groups. I've been part of those groups for a couple of years now. And then there's in-depth interviews that I've been doing now. I've interviewed about 22 people. And machine learning, I'm working on designing a code in the sense that, most of the codes do not acknowledge the local languages. So what has been happening is once I extract that data, I have to eliminate or delete whatever is not in English. But I'm trying to find a way of creating an accommodative or an all-inclusive code that can actually interpret or actually acknowledge the differences within the languages. So these are my preliminary findings. Like in community orchestration, there's a model that is coming up. We see a face-to-face interaction where small groups meet. When I talked to them, the majority, the 22 people, they said they started with small interactions, a few of them. And then from there, they went on Facebook, created these groups, posted their dissatisfaction. But then they received a backlash from both the government threats and also from political fanatics or cadres. And then they went back in fear and regrouped saying, oh no, we need to create a strategy. So initially they had no strategy, it was ranting, but then they go back face to face and create a strategy which they said was all inclusive. They said, in this sense, we're not just focusing on us who are struggling, but we want to deliver a message that actually touches everyone else. So even the people, one of them said the people that scared them or threatened them at some point, when they shared their ideas, their vision, the person apologized and decided to join them because they realized that the youth, most of them, even those that are actually cadres, political cadres, are unemployed. They're doing that because they just want to survive. So they actually started speaking the same voice. And then within the groups, when I was doing interviews, I had people that are now, as I'll show, have turned into, I call them, celebrities. They were youths, and now because they have succeeded, now most of them have been given government positions, But then we have a group of those top fans that just follow or always comment on a post. I also found that group and I interviewed them. And then within that environment, or within our environment, we have people that have a questionable character. And these are people that the government does not care about. Maybe they, in Zambia or in most of the cultures outside the globe, sex working is not considered as one of those rights that one can have. People look down upon those actually that participate in sex work. So on social media, they're there. They exist. The government does not acknowledge it. And most people do not want to associate with them. But what I realized is that these people have a lot of followers. And also thanks again to Professor Alam for those ideas. They had a lot of followers. And according to these people, the top fans of the youth, they said they also utilized those people to deliver a message whenever they wanted. So they included everyone on social media, and they sent a message to show that they share a common goal, a common view as youths. And then, so within that, they said they went in and they also utilized people from, let's say, the diaspora in sending messages. So in that sense, and also when it comes to censorship and surveillance, those using those people helped a lot. In the sense that they could not be targeted. And as they said they didn't care who the owner of the message was. The idea was not to show that they were powerful, but the idea was that a message is sent and everyone actually shares or participates in that kind of message. So other things that I found aiding all these processes, we have the Facebook basics, which to some extent is kind of free Facebook, free internet. But at the same time, there's a counteract there of net neutrality in the United States or in the West. That's like it's really defined, but there it's not. And of course, the government, for the most part, owns part of this. There's zero rating services, and also the connection between Facebook and Airtel companies helped a lot in the sense that people could use Facebook on their phones for free. And then the change of VPNs, we saw during the elections that actually the government would shut down the internet and most people would share their VPN, like the diaspora. Let's in the UK would send a VPN and people would actually participate in those and they would continue. So that really helped. And of course, Facebook anonymity, as I said, they didn't care about who goes there or who is shown, or who owns the content. The content has to be delivered, and they also used multiple individuals to send the message. So sometimes just a local person or a person that is of questionable character would be used, and then they'll just go in and like, and by liking, they become top fans. And people follow that. So in that sense, they said the government did not actually bother them that much. And then they used memes and parody. They created a language that, sounds normal, but it was delivering a message and it was hard for the government to use it or against them. So the Facebook influencers that I talked about also are people that are just basically influencing the whole idea of Facebook. Then what the question that still remains is what happens when the marginalized gain popularity through social media and join the elite group? So what we see is the guy that was in the opposition. So they helped vote out the government that they considered corrupt. And then they brought in a new guy that you're seeing in a red tie there. He's now the president. And everyone is excited because that's the guy they thought could help them. And at the moment, I think he's doing good. There have been a few cases where he has arrested the opposition, almost the same as the previous president. And the question is, can they voice out? You know, what we're saying is like one of them is given they are appointed in government positions. This guy married, and the president actually gave him directly wrote something on to him on social media. And then we have some that actually now can show that they have the money. They come from nothing, now they do have the money, and believing that these were, they're kind of transformed or turned into cadres as well, similar to those. The question is, how do they navigate through the process? And when I asked them, all of them said, we still remain with our message and we want to deliver that same kind of message. Whether that's true or not, I think is still questionable, and I'm yet to see that. So that becomes the questions that are unresolved. I won't go into some of the plans, but generally, what I want to do is to extend these and also trying to do public scholarship, engaging with other people, and also continue looking at socially relevant topics. Thank you. I hope we still have some time to do that.
Yes, we have a couple of minutes. Thank you so much. That was fascinating and such interesting project. It just looks like such a big undertaking. I really admire, you know, the extent of the data that you have to collect and all of that. Without talking more, I'm going to ask the participants if they'd like to ask any questions from Professor Gondwe. Do you have any?
I have my hand raised, but I don't know if you can see.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see you. I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, Professor Mohtasa.
So thank you so much for organizing this, and thank you for both speakers. It was wonderful. Dr. Gondwe, I have a question about mobile banking. I've never heard of that. Can you explain it a little bit more? Like, how does it work? What do they do exactly with? Is this only in certain parts of Africa? Is it in other places around the world?
So at least I know all parts of Africa have that. I don't know much about other parts of the world, but basically the way the mobile banking works is all you need is just a phone, and that phone, you don't need internet on that phone. So even the oldest phone can work. And then you register your number, and with that number, you can actually put money in there. They have these small tents where you give them the money, and that money becomes virtual, you know, in the sense that it's powerful by itself. You know, you can go and buy in the store anything you want. You can exchange, you can send. I can also send money from the United States through somebody's mobile phone. And so that banking system is not connected to any bank. It's just the mobile phone that you need. So it's kind of like just virtual money. I know here you have like something like Cash App, you know, but that's different because Cash App and all other forms are connected to a bank. But with the mobile banking, it's not connected to a bank whatsoever. So many people, even in rural areas, use that, you know, because initially people would send money to their parents in rural areas. That was different, but now they just have to text them and they receive the money. And most of research has shown that they actually, women also use that as one form of, in small scale businesses to empower themselves. I don't know if I've given enough information, but I'm happy to share more about it.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions? Can I ask you a very quick question? My question is about your methods. You said you're trying to distinguish the different languages that people use. So can you say a little bit about that?
Yes, so with machine learning, or most of the things that we use technology from the West. And what it does, if let's say I use it on the data from Zambia, is that it will only identify English language. So anything that was said or posted in different languages is not recognized. So what I'm trying to do is to create a code, because all you need is a code to actually identify those and put them in themes. So I'm trying to actually create a code that can be able to identify all those kind of languages. I know Africa has a lot of languages, but I think there are few that are actually used in form of communication online. So I believe that, it could be a tedious kind of work to do, but I think it's doable.
Yes, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So, other questions? Well, I know we're out of time now, so I would like to thank again our wonderful speakers and everybody who attended the forum. We hope to have more of these in spring as well. I think Dr. Chong is really committed to these talks, and thank you all for being here. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.